some of them are just enjoying the hacker culture, and I think there is a bit of excitement in it, trying to participate to make a change. It's actually interesting because even as much as I support Julian Assange, if you look back into his past, and I think it's quite verified that he himself used to be belonged to a group which was kind of ethical hackers, or people who would try to enter systems, not do any damage to the system, but just try to enter the systems for the sake of trying to test their skills. And if you look at his past, he was working on security software, or at least encryption, things like that, which enabled him in turn to create a site which does the transmission of documents, which hides both the receiver and the sender of the documents, or at least is supposed to do that. So there is a bit of a hacker culture around WikiLeaks itself, and I think it's doing a disservice to these people, especially when you try to, if you're one of the people who try to smear them, you can easily try to draw a connection between these two groups, working in IRC channels and communicating with encryption, and actually having some background in hacking and using free software tools. All these things kind of make you think maybe they have something in common, but I think one of them is just a group of disruptors, and as I said before, they just look for people to attack. I don't think necessarily they care so much about WikiLeaks in specific.
I think there's a parallel as well between real life protests as well. I mean, it doesn't matter what the cause is. I mean, look at the student protests recently in London. The vast majority of them were peaceful, were genuine students. They were peaceful, and they were there for I mean, whether you agree with their stance or not, they were there to peacefully protest, democratically protest. But there was a hardline few who went there to fight. They went there to cause trouble. They went there to riot.
Some of them weren't students. I know of quite a few.
Yeah,
sorry
exactly.
to interrupt you. I know a person who I know from the internet, and he used to run a show with a person that we might have on the show in the future. But he's an activist in general, nothing to do with students. He's not a student himself. He's about my age, and he looks for trouble because he wants to film the thing and put it on YouTube, and then he gets lots of views. And he uses the student protest as an excuse to squeeze himself in among the students, and they cannot really tell the difference between a person who's a student and who isn't, because it can be all sorts of ages. And he goes around with a megaphone and he causes trouble, and he also tries to incite them against the police and things like that. So, and then you have people groups trying to join the parade for the sake of their own interests, or just to agitate the police. And then again, you have the police always, and they do actually, it's confirmed, they use some agent provocateurs and people whom they use as an excuse to label all the protests as dangerous and illegitimate, or to show that the police force is necessary, or that increased use of force is justified because somebody was given a car, or perhaps they asked some people to do certain things and to stage an attack. And it does happen. I know some people will oppose to this, but it was proven several times. There were cases with informants and people who would go inside a person's group. And I know also in the case of WikiLeaks, they had an issue with the CIA trying to sneak people into the group. They have the CIA trying to host a mirror now of the WikiLeaks site so that they can use it as a honeypot to track people, and they actually do that. And more recently, there was a mosque which had an informant for the FBI being planted inside it, and they actually reported him to the FBI or to the police because he was too extreme, they said, which is kind of funny because these people try to say to you certain things that will get out of you certain phrases or certain behavior which you otherwise kind of self-censor. So what happens in here with WikiLeaks and with the protests online, you could have, among the people who attack those websites, you could have interests for passing new laws. You could have the establishment participating in these attacks. And what's also interesting, that's the last thing I'll say, is that they always investigate when you attack Visa or when you attack PayPal, but nobody's investigating the attacks on WikiLeaks, don't worry. Which is quite striking, actually, because it's been attacked, in our service too.
Right, well, if we've covered WikiLeaks enough, I've got a nice little segue. which is kind of similar, if no one's any objections.
No, go ahead.
Right. Roy?
Yeah.
I think Roy's happy.
Right, okay. Right, okay. I was just checking. Right, this one is /one again. It's an IT worker's revenge lands her in jail. It's an IT worker in a health centre in Florida. And she was sacked for gross misconduct. And she took her revenge by hacking into the systems, the servers, deleting files, changing passwords, just creating all sorts of havoc with the system. And the result of that little bit of revenge, she might have felt great for a couple of days, but I hope she's loving it, because she's now got 19 months in a federal prison for that little bit of revenge. The thing is, I mean, that it shows the power that admins have over the systems, the level of trust they have, and people that abuse it. It just taints every other sysadmin. It kind of alerts people to just how much power sysadmins in their companies and their organisations have, and what they could do if they abuse it, which leads to even more stringent rules and regulations for things that they can and can't do. It just ties their hands down further to the honest ones, you know. So
it brings up an interesting question, which I wish I'd known about that particular link. But as we record this sort of on the hop, as it were, we don't know what each other's going to bring up. I'm interested to know about the stock exchange and the issue that they had with the Linux deployment that they've got there now, the open source software that they're using. Roy, did you find any more about the stock exchange story? Apparently it might have been sabotage, it might not have been, we don't know. Was there any more?
As far as I can tell.
Yeah.
But I'm mostly looking by patterns. I don't look at the LSC so much. I look mostly at news to do with Linux and open source. But there was an interesting story about an engineer from Goldman Sachs who was taking some code with him, and his reasoning or his defense was that they were mixing open source or free software with proprietary code, and he was just trying to pull out the bits which were supposed to be shared or legal to share, and he lost the case, like, I think 2 or 3 days ago. And it's also it's interesting for other reasons I wrote about, and that it shows that Goldman Sachs is mixing free software with proprietary, which you could think is a sign of success, and you can maybe say that probably infringe on actually, I guess it would be infringing on copyright law based on the GPL, based on the fact that the GPL is a copyright using license. But I could say more about Goldman Sachs. You know, I don't think this is the main issue with this banking firm. And I watched it's really off topic, but I watched a very very long speech, maybe 3 hours, 4 hours from Bernie Sanders he's from Vermont, and he gave a very, very strong speech where he, as a senator, dares to call the bankers crooks, and he compares them to the mafia, and he calls to break the banks, and it's really quite extraordinary, and this was the leading trend, I think, in Twitter for several hours last night, which is extremely unusual for a speech that was given in these circumstances. So, yeah.
Well, sticking with sort of very quick news bites, and it's not really news, it's really just reiterating what we've discussed many times on TechBytes before. Microsoft is still reported to be very tight-lipped about the sales of Windows Phone 7. There's been no indicators about how many units have sold, no strong indicators about numbers or anything like that. And in fact, I saw a clip very recently, I believe it was on your site, Roy, in regards to it was a collection of clips of Microsoft employees being questioned about Windows Phone 7 figures, and
they have a policy and they stick to the policy so far.
Yeah. So that's that little bit of news, but that carries on from what we've been saying for.
Yeah, and they try to use humor to sneak out of the questions, and they try to dodge the question. Now, what I'm not exactly sure about is why they avoid answering. I mean, eventually they'll have to give an answer now. they give an answer. A first few days, obviously, they make more sales because people have pre-orders and things like that. I can imagine if it's true that they sold only 40,000 of it